The phone rang at 5:47 in the morning. Merle Ashford was already up, had been since 4:30, as he had most mornings for the past 38 years. He picked up on the second ring. It was his neighbor, Dale Fitch, calling from the road. Dale said, "Merle, your pump house is locked. There's a yellow lock on the door and a cap sealed on the casing and a sign I can't read from here, but it says something about legal proceedings." Merle said nothing for a moment. He looked out the kitchen window at the dark. He said, "When?" Dale said he'd seen it driving past at 5:30, hadn't been there yesterday evening. Said he stopped and got out and stood at the fence line, but didn't want to go further without calling first. Merle thanked him and hung up. He pulled on his boots. He walked to the pump house without a flashlight. He knew every foot of the path. The lock was commercial steel, bolted through a hasp someone had drilled into his own doorframe. The cap on the casing was a pressure seal, the kind used in formal legal disputes. The sign read, "Property subject to easement claim. Access restricted. Consolidated Land Holdings, LLC." He read it twice. He turned around and walked back to the house. That was March 4th, 2024. Merle Ashford was 71 years old. He had owned 190 acres in Pawnee County, Oklahoma for 38 years. The well they had sealed had sat on that property since 1977. The permit that authorized it had been issued by the Oklahoma Water Resources Board on June 12th of that same year. Consolidated Land Holdings had spent 3 hours reviewing his file before placing the lock. Before the year was out, a federal judge would order them to pay $387,000. Merle had not started with land. He had started with nothing close to it. A rented room above a feed store in Pawnee, a truck that ran when it decided to, and a job working other men's farms for $6.50 an hour in 1974. He had grown up in town, the son of a man who worked at the refinery and rented the same house on Elm Street for 31 years without ever owning an acre of anything. His father died still renting it. Merle made a quiet decision at around age 20 that that was not going to happen to him. He saved for 6 years. He went without things other men his age considered ordinary: a newer truck, Friday evenings at the bar, a single vacation in a decade. In 1980, he bought his first 40 acres from a retiring farmer moving to Tulsa to be near his daughter. He paid $28,000. He had $400 left in his account the day he signed the papers. He moved a used trailer onto the property and lived in it for 3 years while he built the farmhouse from the frame out. He met Donna Perkins at a church potluck in Pawnee in 1981. She was a bookkeeper by training and a careful person by nature. She had a habit of writing things down: dates, amounts, names, the terms of agreements spoken aloud and never formalized, and keeping what she wrote. She thought Merle's plan was serious, and his land was rough and his trailer was entirely too cold in winter. She married him anyway in April of 1983, and she helped him build everything that came after. They bought the adjacent parcels in 1986, and in 1991, bringing the total to 190 acres. They grew winter wheat on the eastern half and ran a cow-calf operation on the west. The years were not all good. Drought in 1988 that turned the wheat fields gray by July. Cattle prices that fell in 2002 far enough that Merle sold his entire breeding stock at a loss and rebuilt from 14 heifers the following spring. A hailstorm in 2009 that erased the wheat crop in a single afternoon. He did not borrow against the land through any of it. He renegotiated payment terms, deferred what could be deferred, and kept going. The well had been drilled in the spring of 1977, 3 years before Merle owned the land. The farmer before him had it drilled to reach the Garber-Wellington Aquifer, the deep sandstone formation that ran beneath much of central Oklahoma. The drilling company was out of Stillwater. The permit from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, number W19774-CR, was issued June 12, 1977. The well was certified, registered, and legal. The pump house had been built over it in 1984. Merle and Donna built it together over a long weekend in October, working from a hand-drawn plan Donna had sketched on graph paper. The well was the only water source on the property. The livestock depended on it. The house depended on it. Without it, nothing on the farm worked. Donna Ashford died in November of 2019. She was 63 years old. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed in August, gone by November. She kept her filing system organized until the end. In October, she had asked their daughter Karen to come out and help label the final boxes. There were 4 metal file boxes in the basement, each painted gray, each labeled on the lid in Donna's handwriting by year range. She told Karen, "Those boxes are everything. Make sure your father knows where they are." He knew. He had always known. He had just never needed them before. The company that sealed the well was registered in Delaware and operated from an office in Oklahoma City. Consolidated Land Holdings had no presence in Pawnee County that anyone could point to before the summer of 2023. Their model was direct. Identify rural parcels with disputed or ambiguous easement histories, acquire the adjacent land at market rate, assert the disputed access rights, and resolve them, either through settlement or through the enhanced property value that legal clarity produced. They had been doing this in 4 Oklahoma counties for 18 months. The representative assigned to the Ashford case was named Brandon Fells. He was 34 years old. He had a law degree from the University of Oklahoma and 6 years in land acquisition. He drove a black SUV. He wore a suit to every site visit. He was polite the way people are polite when they have already decided the outcome before they speak. Consolidated had purchased 340 acres to the north of Merle's property in August of 2023. Their survey of the acquisition identified what they described as a historical easement corridor running across the northeast corner of the Ashford parcel. A 40-foot strip they claimed carried pipeline access rights under a 1961 oil and gas lease. Their position was that Merle's pump house and the well casing beneath it sat within that corridor. 3 days after the lock was placed, Brandon Fells drove out to the farm. Merle was in the yard when the black SUV pulled in. Karen had driven up from Stillwater that morning. Dale Fitch had come over because that was the kind of neighbor he was. The 3 of them were standing near the pump house when Fells got out. He introduced himself, handed Merle a card, and walked to the door of the pump house without being invited to. He looked at the lock. He looked at the sign. He turned back to Merle. He said, "Mr. Ashford, this is a straightforward easement matter. The well installation falls within a corridor established by a 1961 lease agreement. We're happy to reach a resolution that works for everyone." Karen said, "He's had this well since before your company existed." Fells said, "Ma'am, historical use doesn't override a recorded easement. That's just how property law works." He said it the way you'd explain something to someone who wouldn't be expected to understand. Merle went inside and came back with a folded document. He held it out. Fells took it. It was the 1977 water permit. Fells looked at it for about 20 seconds. He folded it back and returned it. He said, "Historical documentation. I understand. Your attorney will want to review the easement language before drawing conclusions from this." He got back in the SUV and left. Merle looked at the permit in his hand. Dale said, "You need a lawyer." Merle had already decided that. Fells had done this in 3 previous counties. In each case, the landowner had settled within 90 days. The average settlement was $47,000 paid to Consolidated in exchange for a cleared title. No case had reached federal court. His internal projection for Merle Ashford estimated an 84% settlement probability. He had spent 3 hours on the file. He had not, before the lock was placed, read past page 3 of their own surveyor's report. The attorney Karen found was named Paul Greer. He practiced water rights and agricultural law in Stillwater and had done so for 19 years. He drove up the day after Karen called. He walked the property with Merle, looked at the pump house and the sign, asked measured questions about the well's history and documentation. He said he'd need to see whatever records Merle had before he could tell him much. Merle led him to the basement. The 4 gray boxes were on their shelves where Donna had put them. Each lid labeled in her handwriting 1978 to 1985, 1986 to 1993, 1994 to 2007, 2008 to 2019. Greer looked at them for a moment without speaking. He said, "She organized these?" Merle said yes. Greer said, "All right, let's start with the first one." They carried the boxes to the kitchen table. Merle worked through the first box the way Donna had arranged it, chronological within the years, each document in a labeled sleeve with the date noted at the top. He found the well permit in the sleeve marked June 1977. A single page on Oklahoma Water Resources Board letterhead, stamped and signed by the board's director. Permit number W19774-CR. Parcel number, well depth, 310 feet. Aquifer designation, permitted use, registration date. On the reverse side, in older handwriting that was not Donna's, probably the previous owner, a note in pencil. Drilling complete. Certified by OWRB inspector, September 3, 1977. Behind the permit, the original drilling contract from the Stillwater Company. The OWRB inspector's certification letter. The 1980 property transfer document, which explicitly included the well and all associated water rights as part of the sale. Greer read the permit again. He set it down. He said he'd need to verify the parcel number against the OWRB's current registry before he could say anything definitive. He said it was possible the permit had lapsed or been superseded. He said, "Don't get ahead of this yet." He called the next morning. The OWRB confirmed that permit W19774-CR was active, registered, and linked to Merle Ashford's parcel as of the 1980 title transfer. It had never lapsed. It had never been challenged. Then Greer pulled Consolidated's own easement filing, the document they had submitted to the Pawnee County Clerk to establish their claim. It was 11 pages. He read all of it. On page 4, Consolidated's surveyor had noted the presence of a registered water well on the Ashford parcel, cited the OWRB permit number by its registry number, and flagged it explicitly as a pre-existing use right requiring legal review before any easement enforcement action. The flag was on page 4. The easement claim was filed on page 2. Greer said, "Their surveyor told them to stop, before the lock was ever placed." Paul Greer filed in federal court on March 22, 2024. The claim named Consolidated Land Holdings for wrongful interference with a registered water right, trespass, and violation of the Oklahoma Water Use Act. Attached, the 1977 permit, the 1977 OWRB certification letter, the 1980 title transfer, and page 4 of Consolidated's own easement filing, with the surveyor's pre-existing use flag highlighted. The cover argument ran 4 sentences. The filing was 19 pages total. The case went to federal judge Marion Elks of the Western District of Oklahoma. She had been on the bench for 27 years. She had handled water rights cases in Oklahoma for most of that time. Paul Greer told Merle she read everything before she walked in. He said that was going to matter. The hearing was May 19, 2024. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, an American flag in the corner, cold air running from a vent above the gallery. Consolidated arrived first. Brandon Fells, 2 attorneys from the Oklahoma City firm they'd retained, and a surveyor brought as an expert witness. They had a presentation. They had matching folders. They arranged themselves at the table with the quiet confidence of people who had not yet been surprised. Merle arrived with Greer and Karen. He wore a clean shirt. He brought nothing. Consolidated's lead attorney spoke for 22 minutes. He walked through the 1961 oil and gas lease carefully, the historical easement language, the survey methodology, the legal framework for corridor rights. He was precise and professional. He argued that the 1977 water permit, while valid as a use permit, did not supersede a pre-existing recorded easement, and that the pump house location fell within a legally established and enforceable access corridor. Paul Greer stood. He spoke for less than 2 minutes. He said the 1961 oil and gas lease contained a carve-out clause on page 6, an explicit provision exempting registered water infrastructure from easement enforcement in cases where the infrastructure's operational use predated the lease's enforcement trigger. He said the trigger date under the lease's own terms was January 1, 1978. The Ashford Wells OWRB permit was dated June 12, 1977. The certification was September 3, 1977. The well had been operational for 4 months before Consolidated's easement could legally apply to anything on the parcel. He placed the 1977 permit and page 6 of the 1961 lease, a document Consolidated had cited in their own filing, side by side on the table. He sat down. Judge Elks picked up both documents. She read them. The room did not move. Consolidated's attorneys looked at one another. The surveyor looked at his folder. Brandon Fells looked at the table. Merle looked at the flag in the corner. Judge Elks looked up. She asked Consolidated's lead attorney one question. Had the legal team reviewed page 6 of the 1961 lease before filing the easement claim? He paused. He conferred quietly with the attorney beside him. He said they had reviewed the lease in its entirety as part of their due diligence. She asked him to explain how the carve-out provision on page 6 did not apply to the Ashford well, given the permit date and the lease's enforcement trigger. He did not have an answer. He said he would need to revisit the analysis. She did not respond to that. She looked down at the documents again for a moment, then she looked up. She delivered the ruling from the bench. The easement claim was found without legal merit. The 1977 permit was confirmed as a pre-existing use right exempt from Consolidated's 1961 easement under the lease's own carve-out provision. The filing was found to have proceeded without full legal review, in direct contradiction of the flag their own surveyor had placed on page 4 of the same document. She ordered the lock and seal removed within 24 hours. She awarded damages of $387,000, inclusive of legal fees and compensation for 76 days of water access interference. She said, "The page they needed was in the filing they submitted." Consolidated's attorneys gathered their folders. Brandon Fells did not look up from the table. Merle and Karen walked out into the afternoon. Karen drove them home. Neither of them talked much on the way. Merle watched the flat land through the window, the fields and the fence lines, and the particular pale color of the Oklahoma sky in late May. They pulled up to the farm. The lock was off the door. The seal was gone from the casing. Someone had come while they were in court and removed both without leaving a note. The door stood open. The pump ran. The water moved through the pipes with the same sound it had made since 1977, low and steady, which was the sound of the farm working the way it was supposed to work. Karen said, "You want to walk out?" He said yes. They went east along the fence line, north past the wheat, west across the pasture to where the land fell away toward the dry creek bed at the far edge of the property. They stopped at the stand of blackjack oak where the ground leveled out. They had stood in that spot before, the two of them, the day they buried Donna in November of 2019, when the land was cold and the trees were bare. The understanding between them then had not required words. Neither did this. The cattle had come in from the east pasture and were moving toward the water tank. Merle watched them. He said quietly, "Still running, Donna." That was all. They stood there a while longer. Then they walked back. Consolidated Land Holdings surveyor had put the flag on page 4. He had done his job. He had seen the permit number, looked it up, and written what the law required him to write. Someone above him filed the claim anyway on page 2 and sent a man with a lock to a farm in Pawnee County and calculated that a 71-year-old man farming alone would settle before a judge ever saw page 6 of a lease from 1961. What they had not calculated was the basement, or the 4 gray boxes, or the woman who spent 36 years writing dates on sleeves and organizing the truth by year so that the right page would be exactly where it needed to be when it finally mattered. Donna Ashford was not there for any of it. She had been gone 4 years before the lock was ever placed. But she was the reason the lock came off. Tell me in the comments, if Consolidated had offered Merle $80,000 to settle before the hearing, would you have taken it or held out for the judge? I read every one. Subscribe. Next week, a 68-year-old grain farmer in central Missouri, a co-op that claimed he had never fully paid into a 31-year contract, and a deposit book his wife kept faithfully every single year. We'll see you there.